All right, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiajo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. to figure out the future for smart buildings or smarter buildings. We are listed on mondaylive.org, just in case you wonder who we are. Just to point out that views expressed on this show are personal and not of any specific company or organization. And please do post questions and comments on Zoom chat. This show is a lot better with interaction with the audience, so looking forward to that. And lastly, this deck is on mondaylive.org in case you want any of the information that we present here. So this being January, we are in our fourth and penultimate show before AHR and before the Smarter Summit. So we've really been talking about the preparation leading up to the Smarter Summit and AHR Expo. The agenda for today, our normal chit chat, and on the Smart Summit prep, we're going to be focused on the sort of interoperability side of it, and specifically the interoperability framework that we'll be talking about. And yes, Matt, I can only see one of you, and that's good. Thank you. And then we can have some discussion. So before that, just again, another reminder, just in case you need it, the Smarter Summit, the link information is here. It is on smartersummit.org if you want to type it in yourself. But before we do all of that, hand it over to Ken for his perspective this week.
Thanks, Anto. If you think this graphic looks messy, you should see my life. It's going like crazy. We're trying to get as much done as we can before the show. We got a lot of balls in the air. I think Anto's in the same situation with his summit, trying to pull all the pieces together. One of the things we're working on, a little puzzle, I think Tracy asked the question, when will the reinvention be done? And the answer is never, because everything I touch is being reinvented. So we have to come up with new procedures. One of the ones we're working on right now is how to link the presenters' faces and their online message at AHR to online presence. So we can kind of get that all recorded. The equivalent of the PowerPoints, we're trying to create a bridge between face-to-face presentation, so we can reach out. We put some QR codes on our session. So frankly, we don't know what the hell we're doing, but we're going to get there. We're just going to keep moving until we figure out how to skin this puppy. We finally got our Facebook interface up, and we now have a presence there. Facebook is probably not a big seller for our industry, but by the same token, all of these social media platforms, you don't not want to be there, because when they do a search, if you're not there, they pick up the nearest best thing. And I think we all want to be there. So sometimes just having a splash page to bring them back to your page is useful. And that's what we've done. If you haven't fiddled with Facebook for a while, they've actually, the Meta folks have kind of done a better job of presenting companies. There is another section of it that doesn't look like the personal section. Anyway, for whatever what it is, we're now on Facebook. So if you go there, like us, if you like us. The other one is back is Eric of Control Trends. And I think that kind of keeps that message that nobody gets out of our industry. They basically, at AHR, everybody started thinking about him and wanted them to help promote their products. So he started doing posts again, and he very graciously did a post for our sessions, and a little bit of rebranding, another twist, which and it also some promotion there. So that's great, I think, and I think Anto's going to talk to Eric and try and get him involved in the summit, so that'll be good as well. We're busy building virtual bridges to the new metaverse and the AI world, and because that's just continuously being reinvented. We're not sure how to do that, but I'm sure that we'll figure it out as we go along. The other thing, that's this idea of having the whole industry posting on our site is really working well. The timely posts are great, but the bigger thing is the knowledge of people who are working with us on a daily basis to actually give us advice and move us ahead has been just totally amazing. The amount of stuff we've learned from putting our sessions together is just great. So I think maybe we're going to change automated buildings to Ken's hookup service or something like that, because it seems like what we're doing is just connecting people together, and once they connect, they do amazing things. So we'll keep you posted on that. Sorry, back to you, Anto.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Mark.
So I'm sharing with you guys an interesting article that I found early this morning. Basically, the lights had been on in a Massachusetts school for over a year because no one can turn them off. I saw that headline and I'm going,
I saw that one too, Mark.
Good. And in one hand of me, I'm laughing. The other hand, I'm going, are you kidding me? And so basically the crux of this is that for nearly a year and a half, this Massachusetts high school has had its lights on 24/7, 7 days a week, to the tune of 7,000 lights in a building, which is obviously no small feat there. And ultimately, the discussion, it's the taxpayers are getting ticked off now because they feel like they're wasting, it's costing them money. The high school is saying we're trying. There was one blame game. It was the supply chain. But ultimately, it came down to this is a good example of vendor lock-in, because they went out and other vendors or suppliers tried to offer a solution, didn't work, wouldn't work, or whatever. And then they ultimately went back to the original and said, yeah, we'll get it for you, but they still haven't done it yet. So when you read this, if you read this, take a look at this. And I think it kind of really sums up many of the bits and pieces of the conversations we've had, since we started Monday Live, the importance of open, not being vendor locked in, and so forth and so on. So I thought it's a good analogy, a good story, and kind of interesting to read. So back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Mark. I was going to say, when you're talking about vendor lock-in, I thought, one vendor sold them the on switch and the other vendor sold them
the off switch.
And gone are the days, when we first started smart technology. You remember this clap on, clap off? It's a shame they can't do that.
Right. It does raise the question: how much else is running that isn't? And if lights are the simplest thing they can't turn off.
Right.
Yeah. And I love this comment. Sorry, Colin Jost just pointed out that the hamsters are going nuts at the school. That's a great one. And so are the mice and the mouses. Yeah, that's good. And the rats. But anyway, go ahead.
I think it also goes to show that this 10-year time constant, that system was put in 10 years ago. Imagine one of these IoT systems 10 years hence, and who's going to be there to support it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And Jim Lee, this is in your home state, buddy. So just want to point that out there too.
Yeah, Jim.
All good.
It's time you made a sales call, Jim.
Right.
Couple of things from me. The first on the left is, you may have seen this on social media. This is obviously Boston Dynamics doing what they do best, the PR videos. But it made me think that obviously that's not as impactful to us because we're not dealing significantly with construction as such. But the journey of AI in many ways is sort of parallel to the journey of robots, right? So here is a sort of a really good interesting article that says, okay, so if the robots don't do the right things by our sort of normal social norms, right? how are we going to control that? So I'm sure there's an equivalent of that in the AI space, and I don't know what it is, but since we're all doing ChatGPT and doing all that kind of stuff, I thought it's an interesting just sort of topic to bring up. And the second one on the left is tech giants shredding workers in real estate. We know that. We've been talking about this, and this is Fortune sort of posing the point that maybe ex-employees that can turn into entrepreneurs can actually snag some of these sweet offices. That kind of led me to think, why would they want to do that? Right? Because if you're a small, nimble startup, the last thing you want to do is have those kinds of offices. But that may be a sort of more of a comment of the fact that this comes from Fortune, but I just thought they're kind of interesting perspectives just to make our lives interesting.
I think Joseph's comment on your slide is fabulous too, Anto, that technology does cause many labor-related things to evolve. In fact, we're working on many of those topics with emerging technology as we speak. So it's funny, Joseph, but it's a great
union
point.
robots.
Yeah.
Well, I got to echo. Let me echo that, Melissa, because without going into the specifics, we're dealing with almost an exact issue too, where technology and unions are having challenges and stuff. Especially with return to offices and not return. So it's actually a very salient point. It's a real point. Unions are having challenges with the whole technology replacing folks. And how does the union participate in those discussions in a meaningful way?
Or when they're, it's a very big topic. A lot of my work is in that area, so it's very interesting. But great point, Joseph. I know it's funny, but it's a good point.
Great. Any other thoughts from anyone in the group?
And just to sort of circle back to your point about laying off the tech giants, laying off the people, and Mark's point, Ken's point earlier about AR. If you saw over the weekend, Microsoft laid off all the VR AR team from a development perspective. Well, apparently they still have a commitment to HoloLens, they say.
This is at the same time as putting in $10 billion into OpenAI.
ChatGPT, yeah.
Go figure.
So, Anto, it's an interesting article I read today from, I think it's Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., complaining about the effect of the workers in her city not coming back to the office because of the transition that occurred with COVID and remote work. And so she was appealing to the Biden administration to basically put pressure on them to send the workers back. I'm sure it's affecting the economics in downtown and in the DC area, but there you go. Another example, and this in the case of the government sector.
Send the workers back in the office. Force them.
Force them. Yeah, she was looking for it to be forced as opposed to 3 days a week, the way the private sector is handling it.
Sure about that?
Send the robots.
Send the
robots would do. The robots would do it. AI would do it.
Well, it's also interesting because I know this has been a big topic for our industry, but we have been finding interesting success where it used to be a bigger issue in getting people to want to do work other than from home. We are actually using it as a screening method with the applicants coming into the high-tech apprenticeships, which, by the way, most of the applicants coming into these apprenticeships are people that have bachelor's degrees. They already have Security Plus certification through the military. These are advanced people looking for great jobs, but we have them answer whether or not they're willing to do on-site work. And about 10% of the applicants say they are not. but the other 90% are more than willing. And we have them rack and stack. How willing are you to commute? And we give them a range, and a sizable number of them are willing to commute substantially. So it is encouraging. It's not all bad news.
All right, let's move on. So thank you, Melissa, for that. Preparation for a Smart Summit. Been showing this cool picture this month. Think of what we're doing right now is that we're at base camp. We're heading to the summit, which is in Atlanta. And we're just trying to figure things out right now here and just make sure that we have all of the necessary provisions and information. And this week, we're going to be talking about Interoperability Framework, which is, I'm going to bring in two guests, Pete Scanlon. Pete, you should come on, and also Matt Turk. Okay, so Pete and Matt both involved in the Div 2525 project, which is a project that started about a year and a half ago. Again, as a collaboration between Monday Live and the Coalition for Smarter Buildings. So I'm going to hand it over to Pete to initially explain what the Div 2525 project is all about and what is the status of that, and I'll bring up the actual document that I'll use to help you from a visual perspective. So Pete, welcome to Monday Live.
Thanks, Anto. Good to see everybody. Looking forward to seeing folks in the audience in a couple weeks in Atlanta. So as Anto said, the Coalition for Smarter Buildings, which I've been part of since the beginning, and so approaching 2 years of organization, was the coalition is basically a community of like-minded folks who are excited about the impact that smarter buildings can have on our lives all around the world. And we were trying to promote the adoption of smarter building technologies and solutions to improve occupants' experiences, operational efficiencies, and help owners achieve their goals and higher value for their buildings. Over kind of recapping the last couple of weeks of Monday Live and getting ready for AHR, where are we on the path towards smarter buildings? And it's really similar to, I think Rick was talking about this last week or the week before. It's a similar path of digitization for everything, for our whole world, right? And there are sections of our daily lives and work lives that are further along on this path, and then there are other sections of our lives that are still early on that path. And the path towards digitization, where everything has an app and we can do everything we want, from our phones, or at least have access to information from our phones, and ideally have two-way interactions where we can control stuff that makes a difference for us. On that path, early solutions on the path towards digitization, and this is true across other industries. Early on, the early solutions deliver a top to bottom solution, right? From where does the data come from, or what's it attached to? How is it connected to databases and saved and sorted? And what kind of smarts are put on top of that to make it useful information? And then what's the user interface to interact with that? And that's typically delivered as its own app, if you can think about the IoT world, or it's a siloed solution. And then over time, as industries advance in digitization, the technology gets better and the connections get better for the information. So all of a sudden, if information from one of those stacks can talk to information from another one of those stacks and connect it to different physical things or different interfaces, whatever direction you want to go, the benefits to the users, it's not just additive, but it's exponential, right? So it's not just one stack plus the second stack equals 2, it's one stack plus the second stack equals 3, or maybe 7. And if you go 1 plus 1 plus 1, a third stack, all of a sudden the benefits could be 9 or more. And for smart buildings, the early entrants into the smart building solution space were, typical to an industry that was pretty mature for 100 years, had delivered physical things that did certain things, and they were all kind of vertical stacks. And to make those things smart, different vendors put user interfaces on them, and you could potentially interact with those systems kind of one at a time. But again, similar to other industries, now the technology and the awareness and technology and the expectations of the customers are, hey, I want information from that system plus information from another one, and I think I could do something even more that neither one of those could do by themselves. And that's great. That opens up all sorts of things that for those of us who serve this industry. So the problem is there hasn't really been an architecture to allow for that exchange of information. And that's where the Coalition for Smarter Buildings decided, hey, if we could convene a group of folks to articulate what the standards need to be to exchange information from one system to another, we could help accelerate the adoption of smarter building solutions. So that's what we tried to do. For those who have been in the construction industry, which is where I came from myself years ago, you might be familiar with the bidding process for new construction jobs. And they often follows a uniformat, what's called a uniformat or master format numbering system for bidding different parts of work for a job. So if you're building a big building, concrete work for the building is like Division 8. These numbers were created by the Construction Specification Institute, CSI. HVAC is Division 23. Electrical is 24 or 27. The numbers get mixed up in my head. That allows each vendor to know where to look in the specifications for a project for what their work needs to be. And lo and behold, there hasn't really been a place to talk about interoperability between systems in that numbering format. There is a division called Division 25, which is, I think it's called Automation and Controls.
Integrated automation.
Integrated automation, that's the right word, the right name. And that was kind of an outgrowth from like sophisticated BAS systems that might have an internet capability or remote access capability. And that's usually what Division 25 was used for. But there really wasn't a prescription about a part of Division 25 or anywhere else in the specification set to say, here's where you say what is expected for a smarter building and how it should be executed, how the different parts need to come together to allow for this data to move from one to another and to end up with solutions that are more than what any one siloed piece can deliver on its own. So this group, and Anto, you could scroll down to the contributors page, which is a few pages down. So there's a group of about 20, 25 people who have worked over the last year. Many of them are members of Monday Live, the panelist group, but it extends beyond that. Have come together over the last 12 months to come up with ideally what would this look like, and without necessarily picking winners and losers like that product does it, or that stack is the only solution, to come up more generally with the standards, like what would a well-behaved data stack look like and work like in a smarter building that could exchange information and systems could interoperate from one to another. So this is the team right here that has contributed so far, and this is open. This is an open group, by the way. If you are interested in contributing, we invite you to help. And at AHR, we will extend that to a broader audience as well. So what is this group doing? There are 3 sets of documents, or three messages we're trying to support. The first one is we wrote a short, it's a 2 or 3 page vision document. You know, what if your building could ... fill in the blank. And it's a way to capture the imagination of the owners and the operators of buildings to think new about what their building could do if it was smarter. So that vision document has been created. It's posted on the coalition website, and I think there's a link for Monday Live as well. And that just lays out, you know, here's what's the realm of what's possible. Is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's intended to generate interest and from owners and operators of buildings to say, oh, I want that for my building. And then they say, the next question is, how could I get it? So the next step is what do we want to introduce today, which is this framework document, which on the screen it says 10 to 20 pages, but it's actually about 50 pages now. And the framework is a document to provide context for why are these, you know, for a specific project, what would be the purpose of interoperability for this project? And then how do you connect the purpose to the execution of it, installing it, and then operating the building. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that today. And then ultimately, the goal of the team and the coalition is to collect and share a library of example projects, example specifications, which can be very technical and can get very long. So we didn't tackle that first. But there are people who are members of the group whose job it is and whose companies provide specifications. And there are other members of the group who receive specifications about jobs, and they respond to them as to supply their services or their products. So we want to, our goal is to collect examples that owners, specification writers, general contractors, and vendors, suppliers can look at to say, oh, that's what I want for my project, or this is what I can provide to a project. So ultimately, we're aimed towards specifications, a library of specifications. So that's kind of where we came from, and I wanted to briefly show the Division 2525 kind of outline, or the graphic here, Anto, which you just use the first page, I think, of the cover page. There you go. What the team did was followed this diagram that actually Monday Live team helped define more than a year ago, which was called the Smarter Stack. And here's where, again, you can think about the solutions that were delivered up till now were kind of vertical solutions from top to bottom here that said, for example, at the top of the stack, oh, I want, you know, HVAC control for my building. That's the purpose of, that's one of the things I need to do. And that would be the goal at the top. At the bottom, and the physical elements, you'd say, oh, here's the chillers and the VAB boxes and the thermostats in the building that control that. And then here's the layers of things in between those physical elements that will help deliver to the users, the building occupants or the operators, the facility managers of the building, to control the HVAC. And so all these layers have been delivered in vertical solutions in the past. And now by teasing out what that there are in fact layers to what gets done, and teasing them out, we can see that there are natural places for certain things to align from one type of system to another, and for certain ways to exchange information from one system to another. So Division 25 for naming purposes, the subdivision is 2525, and we've co-opted the name. We're just sort of self-designating this as Master System Integration Requirements. So that's what Division 2525 is about, and no one else had used that number. That's why we claimed it. And then in Division 2525, we've broken out 11 sections altogether, although .00 is kind of the intro section, which are shown here on the screen. And so this framework document follows this numbering sequence as the major chapters. And we're hoping that at AHR, we introduce this to a broader audience, and that owners get wind of this and say, oh, this is excellent, because I can answer the question, the purpose at the top. This is why I want my buildings or my portfolio to be smarter. I have ESG goals, you know, part of my mission. I have operational efficiencies I want to gain. My occupants want to have a better experience. Those are things that are important to me. And vendors who are supplying me, please comply with this framework, with this architecture, and do it this way. And that way owners don't have to learn all the intricacies. They can just point to this and say, line it up with that. So I'm going to pause here. And actually, Matt, you're on the call here. I might turn it over to Matt from Newcomb and Boyd, whose firm, and I believe your own job, Matt, is to help owners organize their projects to do smarter solutions. And I'm curious how you've tackled this issue in the past, and does this framework help with that cause?
Thanks, Pete. Yep, Matthew here with Newcomb and Boyd. So as you see the framework on the screen, there's a lot of useful information here if you're a specifying engineer. And that's essentially what I am for, smarter buildings, intelligent buildings, whatever you want to call it. Largely, it's just making sure that the systems installed have an upgrade path, and that you can actually not just specify how data can be exchanged and shared, so the system is interoperable, but also making sure it's executed in a manner such that that's repeatable on every job and actually documented, so that somebody coming in behind after the fact actually understands what's actually out there, what are the data points associated with it, and then how you're actually going to be able to share that information is kind of that networking and cybersecurity piece. Because if you're going to share data, you're going to have potential vulnerabilities. You need to address that in a way that's appropriate to your organization, but also you want to make sure that you're actually only sharing the data that you need to share between the systems. Let's just throw an example out there. Maybe my security system needs to share some information with another system, but it doesn't need to know any of the personal PII information whatsoever for that share. So it's making sure we're lining everything properly, and that our organization is aware of the risks you're going to take on. And a lot of risk is mostly about understanding what you're going to run into within an organization. So, and also quantifying that risk. So clearly, but the biggest thing we're finding at Newcomb and Boyd is if you can have the owner define for you what the purpose of integration is, then as a designer, you can easily understand what data needs to be shared by understanding that purpose of integration with some experience. And then you can architect what I would call a master system integration documentation, where you're helping to define the individual roles and responsibilities so that a GC or someone else, like a master system integrator, for example, can actually start to implement these solutions because they're going to understand where responsibility lies. And that's the key with specifications. Specifications are meant to be directive. They're orders, essentially. You contractor, you need to do this, this, and this. And then if we're going to actually get all that aligned and make sure it's all properly documented, then we can actually have these interoperable solutions on day one. And then if we have that, then the owner has a lot more value to the building, as everyone has been talking about consistently here on Monday Live. And that's what, our owners want. That's what our customers want. They want to be able to install the same thing they've been doing for the longest time, but get more benefit out of it. And largely, this is just minor tweaks within the process itself that aren't significantly more expensive, and sometimes not even more expensive at all. In fact, sometimes they're cheaper, and just making sure that's all documented properly. So, and for the most part, smarter buildings are there. It's just making sure you get it all lined up right.
Matt, I'm curious if you can tell us how a consulting engineer would actually use this document, this framework. What is and also how other consulting engineers would look at this and how it improves what they're able to do. Maybe your competitors, but
so the biggest thing about the framework is by taking the information from it. So the buildings and systems are largely designed in silos, as everybody's always talked about, right? So you specify something based upon a system or a piece of equipment going inside the building. Well, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can put those requirements in Division 25 and then have everybody reference to them about how you're going to share information, and you have to be specific to each piece of equipment because that's important. Nobody's exactly the same everywhere about how you can share information and how you're going to document the information from it, because there's slightly different versions everywhere. So the key is making sure you're actually aligning that with the specific role or the specific system, because that's how buildings are traditionally basically ordered, specified, whatever you want, let's say on that matter. So that's the key, though, is taking all the elements within this framework, coalescing that in a document or series of documents that can be easily handed over to somebody else and understood. One of the things we've done at Newcomb is we've actually taken this abstraction you see on your screen, and we've applied it directly to the systems. That's the way we've done it. We've been able to apply it directly to each individual system, and then we kind of have an orchestration document as well that goes along with it, kind of aligning with the roles and responsibilities. So there's a lot of good information here that you need to take account of when you're actually looking at it. How is your system going to share information? What are the requirements for the application? Another way of thinking of that is software. Software has to get deployed. How are we going to do that in order to make sure this project's successful? How are we going to make sure data is properly shared with the people who it needs to be shared with, the system that needs to be shared with? That's just data governance. And then you kind of get down to the actual requirements to the actual systems and the controllers and things of that nature. Things that aren't necessarily, they're more like creating the data you need necessarily than they are the abstract piece that actually turns data and manipulates it into something that you actually want to see on a GUI or user interface of some sort. So that's how we've taken this approach. And largely that abstraction you see on your screen is something that has to be taken and applied directly to the devices, because that's the traditional procurement model.
So can you speak to, there's a lot of discussion always about new build versus retrofit, and different kinds of projects. Does this apply to one or the other, or?
That would apply to any building. There's nothing here specific. The only nuance to a retrofit is you may have systems already in place, and you need to understand what you can do with those potential systems. And you got to figure out, is this okay? I have a lighting control system in place. One, is that system up to date? Can it be upgraded? Is it a cybersecurity risk just flat off? Or does it even provide an interface I can integrate with? Those are all questions you have to ask when looking at a renovation. But the same general principles apply. If there's a reason, a purpose for the integration, a business use case, then that just flows downstream with how you're going to investigate it. Once again, we're still going to get back to the same underlying key features you see here in the framework. How can I share the data? Who's going to govern it, et cetera?
One other question, I want to have other people chime in. In terms of size of buildings, does it matter what the size of the building in terms of the applicability of this framework?
No, not specifically the size of the building. How you look to deploy it, yes, you're going to have to make nuanced variations based upon that. And that's the job of a good engineer, right? Right sizing your system to each building and the owner's needs. So no, the framework is agnostic enough where you can easily take and apply that.
And to that note, our company has done numerous projects, a couple thousand square feet, 5,000 square foot, like small office buildings that have 4 or 5 systems that needed to interoperate, to 12,000 square foot municipal buildings that have, several more systems, to, large campuses that have several 100,000 square feet of space, and some of it's lab work and some of it's office and things like that. And those are fairly complicated buildings. This same architecture supported that whole range of solution. And some of them only had 3 or 4 systems that needed to talk to each other, and others had, some enterprise software that they had to talk to as well. So
can we open it up to the panelists? Melissa, I think you.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say, that David has a really good question and point, and Matthew, thank you for commenting today. And I know Newcomb and Boyd have been assisting with instructors for the cybersecurity training and other things, but David has a really good question about where the building intelligence cybersecurity framework fits in with this. And, perhaps I know Michael's been on that Breakfast Club routine, but do you have any comments for David's good question?
You're talking about BCS, and David Katz's question is about Bixie, which is not BCS.
Different.
Understanding.
Well, Bixie, yeah, I'm very familiar with Bixie, but thank you for correcting me. But could you comment on both, perhaps?
Sure. So I'll first go back to Bixie. Bixie has been traditionally a structured cabling based organization. The backbone of almost any Division 25 or integrated automation deployment is going to be on a traditional network, an IP stack of some sort. There's no reason to recreate something. And then a lot of the industries are adopting IP anyway as standard. So you're always going to need Bixie standards for everything related to your structured cabling. There's no getting away from that. And, the framework here doesn't look to address that because that's defined elsewhere, right? Division 27 has been around for quite a while. And so is structured cabling. It's been going, 20 years plus, I guess now, easily. So you have a well-defined thing there with Bixie. And I've seen the Bixie standard, and I think it's not quite as developed as this. The Bixie standard is once again focused on that infrastructure piece, whereas this is focused on the data, which is the underlying reason for the smarter building in the first place, right? You want to share data. The physical kind of componentry of that is just a piece of that, and that's already been defined elsewhere. Let's not recreate that.
And that's the same. It's the same concept with HVAC, for example, or any other trades, right? It's defined well elsewhere in master format, right? Where it comes into 25 is really where we're interested, or the owner is interested in extracting or providing data and information to make that system better, as per what Pete was saying, 1 + 1 = 3. So
And
that's.
Thank you, Anto. And then back to the, I believe it was the BCS, the Building Cybersecurity.
Right.
I said that wrong. Clearly, in order to make, influence, and if you want to actually provide an integrated system, like you're going to have to look at providing a full cybersecurity methodology that needs to be deployed as a part of the project. The last thing you want to do if you're an owner is you find out, 3 years down the line, you connected something to your network, and what happened was the controls contractor or whoever else came out on the job, they use their standard password that they use everywhere, admin, or, password is the password, right? These things that just make these systems highly vulnerable. Cybersecurity is, I like to think of it more as like general hygiene. Like, do you want to brush your teeth every day? Yes, you want to brush your teeth every day. It's good for you, right? And it doesn't have to be extremely complicated. It can be as simple as password standards. How are you going to change those password standards? What are you going to enable on your device? I have a Wi-Fi device here, or an IP connected device. I'm not using Wi-Fi. Why do I want to have that interface open? Like, can I disable that? There's just small little things you can look to, do as a part of cybersecurity. And you want your contractors delivering you a building that day one that your bare minimum standards have been met. Is your data encrypted? They're just little small things that can be enabled as part of that configuration of these systems. That's absolutely something that needs to go in there. And then organizations like the one we were talking about that my colleague Michael's a part of, they're looking at helping owners be able to assess those risks with a framework where they can say, okay, great. I want to know what my building's at. So I'm going to allow a third-party agency to come in and look at that. And then they can actually say, like, okay, your building's going to meet, this level. Here's a certification. And that'll make other future, tenants, if you have a multi-tenant situation, or if you're looking to have cybersecurity, insurance, like, okay, you have a green check mark here. We're going to give you 20% off. Just little things that can help every owner feel a little bit more safe and secure about looking to deploy these integrated systems where you get more value.
So you also notice that there are 2 vertical sections that cover networking, which is really it's not quite the Big C thing, but that's where a lot of it will actually fit into, or point into the networking, and the cybersecurity is the other cross-cutting issues. So it's kind of interesting that those 2 are like that. Steve, I think you have a question.
Yeah, so Matt, I'm curious, the framework is really a series of questions around each of the layers in the stack for consideration, issues that should be thought about, addressed, specified ultimately, right? But it's not, we're calling it 25 to take advantage of the CSI master format way of thinking. But I wanted to know from your standpoint, when we move to the next evolution of this thing, where we start putting specs and examples together, how you would take the language that we ultimately put into this document. And I'm assuming it's going to end up in the traditional parts of the specification for Division 25, that you're not going to break out and have a separate 25.25 section where you go to look for all this stuff, or maybe you are. That's why I'm asking the question.
Good question.
That's a great question. I think that really depends on how you actually want to structure your information.
Yep.
There's 2 different approaches you can do here. One, you can just bake it into the existing format and have this be a separate thing you pull in.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a really small project, that probably isn't a big a deal. But once you get, if you get outside of maybe 3 or 4 systems, reproducing that is just such a time difficulty.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of, nuance to this is it's better to have a generic place where you have your requirements. And CSI format is super hyperlinked together. Like everybody understands that even though the mechanical contractor is providing the mechanical equipment, that the electrical contractor is giving the power there, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, this is like a similar thing here, except we're talking about data. So there's a different nuance, which is just kind of invading the market with, well, okay, I got the physical connection for the data, but then I got to structure the data so that somebody else can interpret it. And then I have to make sure my data is secured so that nobody's messing with it. So those are kind of like the various little pieces that need to happen in part of that. And so I guess we're going around the question here, Steve.
Yeah.
It depends on how you want to structure it. At Newcomb, we've taken a more centralized approach here, but most of our projects are quite large.
Yeah. So for the larger projects, probably what you're saying is it would make sense as we evolve this thing to make it a part of 25, obviously, but within its own, retaining the 25-25 concept, and everybody refers to that within 25, but also I could see people from 27 and 23 looking to this as well, potentially.
Absolutely. And I think the point is, if you're going to be an intelligent building, designer, your job is largely to define the data piece of it.
Yeah.
And then to ensure that other people are actually accounting for that as a part of their documentation as well, whether referring to your stuff or you're giving them information that goes directly on their, drawing specifications, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the key to essentially setting up success to the GC as a part of this process.
So one of the other potential audiences, I think for the framework is on the supply side of the marketplace. And that's us, those of us who are vendors, manufacturers, or providers of services to buildings. And just imagine for a second, and I say this because I've already been in discussions with a very large HVAC manufacturer who was challenged with, who knew that their equipment needed to function in a smarter way, smarter, meaning interacting with other systems. They were not going to build all those other systems or try to bring them into their BAS. So they're like, how can we deliver our equipment to the project so that it complies, so it's ready to plug in to all the right things here? It can address cybersecurity, it can attach to the right network, you can exchange data the right way, you can interface with the UIs, the right way, either natively or through a different UI. And they're like, could we get in front of that? So that instead of each project being its own problem and its own set of things to solve, they deliver to the market stuff that's ready. And I think that's the direction that the supply side of the business, needs to go. And I think, and here through this framework and the discussions that the coalition is trying to promote, if we can create the space to establish what those things are, what those rules are, what the governance policies are, what the standards need to be, that helps both sides of the equation, right? It helps the demand side say, yep, I want it to work like that. And it helps the supply side to say, hey, we can provide stuff that's easy to plug into that.
Right.
So can we, any other thoughts from anyone?
Yeah, and just the real quick closing to follow on Steve's comment with the owner side. For Matt and Pete, you may not even have time to answer this, but I'm curious if there has been a constructability assessment or someone on the team with the 25-25 to evaluate how this would be interpreted from, a GC subcontractor point of view. Just like with what Steve was saying about Vision 27 matching up with, one of the data elements and pieces. when I was in a owner's hat, we would work with our consulting engineers to have full constructability assessments before we put things on the street. Has there been any analysis like that just to see how it will be interpreted by the community that would actually contract for these?
I think that was for you, Matt.
I mean, I can say, I've worked with general contractors before this document existed, who looked to us in the MSI role to say, like, wait a minute, what you guys do is going to touch every other contractor in this project. Can you help us with a project responsibilities matrix that like maps what they do, what each vendor does in terms of what you do and where it intersects? And we were like, okay, sure. And that's one of the recommendations in this document, is to create a matrix like that for your project if it is a complex construction project. But what really helped, or what was needed, what was missing, because some of these were 2-3 years ago, was telling the general contractor, here's the outline that we're following. The reason that matrix works is because we're following this architecture where stuff interacts in a certain way. So I think that GCs, they love clarity and they love grids and matrices and things like that lay it out. And this fits very well, or it supports several processes where, like, responsibilities matrices and things like that.
But
So,
has it constructability from a pre-con perspective? Has anybody run its paces through like that just to get feedback? Has that actually been done?
As
Not
to
that I'm aware of.
the framework itself, I would tell you, in its current manifestation, I would say no. I would say at Newcomb and Boyd, we've done this for 5 years, and we do have the experience to take this information, and we've had lots of success by partnering with our GC contacts, with probably a little bit more different approach than a traditional MEP. Like we want to be hands-on with you through the whole process, obviously, because it is a little bit new. And although we can architect something, there's always going to be somewhat of a gap between what we put on a piece of paper and how that gets interpreted.
And I think
So
that's part of the
we're getting up
story.
to we're at the top of the hour. We need to start to wrap this.
Sure.
I was gonna.
That's a positive story that
Yeah.
can take it to the next level and a good place to pick up.
So
to be
Jim,
able to
can I
get
pick
going.
up? Can I pick you to sort of do a bit of a wrap up? What did you hear?
Yeah, I think that obviously there's been a lot of work done over the last couple of years on this, and I think we're in a great position to start to communicate to the industry a way forward and a platform for people to consider things that they haven't in the past. And I think that's a really good place to start. And I think that if we look at CSI, my biggest concern about this whole area is a lot of the new things, including everything involving data, is an ongoing process. At CSI and everything we've been talking about is still a basically new construction project or product. And we've got to figure out how to bridge that. I think this is a great first step, but getting ongoing revenue out of owners to pay for the maintenance of these items is great. And we won't have as many high schools that you can't shut the lights out on.
Thank you for wrapping it
Great.
back to that.
Great closing point there, Jim.
All right, and with that, let's bring this to a close. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Matt, for joining us today and for your perspective and for your work. And thanks everybody else for being here, panelists and attendees. And have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Video will be out tomorrow as normal. So
Okay.
bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye all. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.